So in Module 1, we wanted you to know the basics about ASDs. And you know that all of the autism spectrum disorders are affected basically in 3 areas. What are those 3 areas again? Anybody? Behavior, social skills, and communication. Right? So, communication disorder of ASD, being conscious of the fact that both expressive and receptive communication skills can be affected. About 50% of the population with an autism diagnosis versus Asperger's or atypical autism, about 50% do not speak and don't speak even into adulthood. Some people diagnosed with ASD are late speakers, so they won't be speaking at the typical developmental times, but may develop speech later on. It's quite fascinating research around the use of the picture exchange system with preschoolers. Fascinating and exciting that kids who can't speak as preschoolers, so in the under 5 age, using the picture exchange system, after about 1 year using picture exchange, 80% of those kids are producing words. They may not be completely verbal, but they're producing speech. That's a huge number. Unusual use of language, so echolalia. Can someone tell me what that's about? Very good. Did you hear that? Can someone tell me what that's about? He said. So that's one form of immediate echolalia. There's also delayed echoes, where people are taking a phrase that they've heard somewhere else and using it in another situation. Echolalia, although it's frustrating for many families and frightens them to some degree because it sounds like their child just repeats back things and doesn't know what they're about, is actually a very good prognosis. Kids who can echo can learn to speak, and that's the starting place for their speech in the future. So it's actually a positive sign. Repetitive speech, pronoun difficulties, pronoun reversal, you're conscious of that one. I don't know if they talked about that in junior or saying you when they mean themselves, and figuring out the pronouns, period, can be tricky. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories of a little fellow that we were working with a number of years ago. He had pronouns for I and me, the basic ones, you, your, and so on, down pretty good, but he really could not get the gender-related ones, like he, she, his, her. And they were, because him and his worker were going back and forth over and over, and he just wasn't getting it. She said, okay, just wait a minute. She is for girls, and he is for boys. And he looked at her like she just made that up and said, what a good idea. They get it eventually. Inflection in speech can sometimes be flat, but that's not the case for everybody. So although that's sometimes a common portrayal, it's not always. And it's important, of course, to recognize communication-wise, people with ASD can learn to communicate in a variety of different levels, using pictures, reading words, even nonverbal individuals, and using words to pointing to words. They can develop their verbal skills, gestures, sign language, picture exchange, and so on. Literal interpretations of verbal language are also a really common characteristic. And I know lots of stories about these ones too. This is my favorite area because you really do have to have a bit of a bizarre sense of humor to work in the field of autism, especially for as long as I have. So I'm going to tell you my favorite one from my own work, which I hate to say was more than 30 years ago. And it was with Gary's place, actually. And I was working with this young man, and we were doing our morning walk exercise, and we were about to cross, this is rural Ontario, and we were And so I made him stop and I made him look to see if there were any cars coming. So I said, okay, Greg, are there any cars coming? And he went, there aren't any cars coming. Didn't look, put his head down. And I said, oh, you have to look down here. And look down here. Are there any cars coming? He said, no, there aren't any cars coming. And about that point, there's a huge transport coming down the road. This is perfect, because he's not going to be able to do that. So I said, okay, Greg, look up, look down there. Are there any cars coming? And by this time, the transport is almost right in front of us. And he said, no, there aren't any cars coming. And I said, Gregory! Gregory, what is that? The truck is right there in front of us. And he said, that is a truck. And he had me. Literal interpretation. No, there were none of the cars coming. Another favorite one, I was doing some presenting a few years back for PPM 140 for the Ministry of Education. We kind of travel all around the province and talked about these literal translations. And so parents, mothers usually would come up to me after and give me their favorite stories. So one was a young man in high school actually with Asperger's, who for the whole year had struggled with his tests and exams, and he never could remember to bring the right book home to study, never remembered what day the test was on, but always had trouble getting it. So this was in June, it was the end of the year, and he had an exam coming up, and he had remembered the books, he studied the right stuff, and he went off to school. So when he came home, his mother said, so, how did you find the questions? And he said, oh, Mom. No, she said, sorry, I get the punchline. Did you have any trouble with the questions? And he said, Mom, of course not. The questions were right there on the page. I had considerable difficulty with the answers. And one more, which is a really cute one too. This was a little guy who his family had got him involved in a soccer team, which is not easy for kids with autism to do, play a group sport. But when they're really little, nobody plays if they don't all play together. So anyway, they had him all set up for this, and they had done so by assigning a peer buddy to him that would help him on the field to go the right direction and so on. Unfortunately, they're all hyped up as they're ready to go on the field, and his peer buddy said, okay, let's go out there and kick some butt.
Oh no!
Yes, oh no. And that's exactly what he did. He ran on the field, started kicking the butts of the other players. All right, behavior. Of course, main thing to remember, we want you to remember, is all behavior has a purpose. And although people often have in the back of their mind, as soon as you say behavior in autism, aggression, that's not the main focus of the behavior in autism. Yes, some people have it. Not all people do. But yes, some people will develop that as sometimes as their frustration or their lack of communication gets them. But more often they're focused on the rigidity within behavior, the insistence on certain interests and topics or activities, so a preoccupation with those things. Repetitive movements are certainly part of the behavior scene. And then in terms of social skills and social interaction, we wanted you to be conscious of the fact that many people with ASD have difficulty with nonverbal communication skills, paraverbal communication, the things that we all take for granted, body language, intonation, facial expression. When we use it, is often not understood or interpreted correctly, or if interpreted at all, by individuals with ASD. And also,